since dozens of Texas Democrats left the state intentionally to delay a vote on a proposed map with new congressional boundaries.
The air over downtown Austin hung heavy, almost electric, as if the city itself knew something was about to break. Dark, bruised clouds rolled over the Texas state capitol, casting long shadows across the building's dome. The bronze statue at the very top stood tall and unmoving, but down below, the streets told a different story, a story of movement, noise, and an undercurrent of fury that could be felt in the solace of your shoes. In the early morning, the city had been quiet. Commuters filed into offices, coffee carts bustled, and the Capitol's marble halls echoed only with the faint shuffle of aides. But as the hours passed, something shifted. Groups began to gather outside the wrought iron gates, some carrying flags and placards, others holding handwritten signs scrawled in thick black ink. Some signs demanded justice, others shouted defiance, and a few simply carried one word: enough. This was no ordinary political protest. This was the final countdown to a Supreme Court decision that had been months, no, years in the making. The background that brought Texas here in the months leading up to this day, Texas politics, had been a tinderbox. Partisan fights had spilled from the legislature into the streets. National attention focused on Austin as lawmakers clashed over a case that had the potential to reshape not only the political landscape of the state, but also set a precedent for the rest of the country. The case itself had started quietly, a dispute over state authority versus federal oversight. But as legal briefs were filed, as arguments were made, and as whispers began to circulate about the court's leanings, it became clear that this wasn't just a technicality or a procedural fight. This was a battle over ideology, over power, and for many, over the soul of Texas. Behind closed doors, aides spoke in hushed tones about what the ruling might mean. Inside the Capitol, lawmakers who were normally animated and loud in debate seemed unusually tight-lipped. "We're not talking about this until it's official," one Republican lawmaker was overheard saying, his voice low, his eyes darting toward the chamber door. The growing tension by midday, the steps of the Capitol were crowded with hundreds of protesters. On one side of the lawn, voices chanted in unison, "Protect our rights! Protect our rights!" While on the other, counter-protesters responded with their own rallying cries. The sound clashed in the air, blending into an unsettling, almost chaotic hum. Police presence had doubled since morning. Officers in dark uniforms and sunglasses scanned the crowd from behind barricades. Some leaned into radios, others simply watched. Social media fed the tension. Live streams from phone cameras captured every chant, every push against the barricades, every sudden flare-up of argument between opposing groups. On Twitter, hashtags tied to the case trended nationally. TikTok videos of protesters confronting lawmakers outside the building went viral within hours, and yet the true weight of the day hung over the still unannounced ruling. Inside the Capitol, the atmosphere inside the building was even stranger, quieter, but no less tense. The thick air smelled faintly of old wood polish and coffee, and the echo of footsteps down the marble corridors seemed louder than usual. Staffers moved quickly between offices, clutching folders and tablets, avoiding eye contact with reporters who hovered like hawks, ready to pounce at the first sign of news. In a corner of the second-floor hallway, two journalists whispered into their phones, exchanging rumors about a split decision or a shock reversal. No one knew which was true. And that uncertainty was precisely what kept the tension at a boiling point. The calm before the storm, then. As the afternoon wore on, a strange calm descended. The chanting outside slowed. Conversations inside became fewer, more cautious. Even the air seemed to hold still. It was the quiet that comes not from peace, but from anticipation, the same stillness before a thunderclap, before a dam bursts. Every eye turned toward the clock. Just minutes remained before the court would make its decision public. Outside, the crowd pressed closer to the barricades. Cameras swung toward the Capitol's main entrance. Protesters gripped their signs tighter. Counter-protesters muttered under their breath. Inside, aides clustered in small groups, their faces tense. In the press room, journalists poised over keyboards, ready to send the first push alert. A single television screen flickered, tuned to a live feed from Washington, D.C., where the Supreme Court's marble steps glowed under an overcast sky dot, and then it happened. The official seal appeared on the feed. A clerk stepped forward to the microphone. Somewhere in the crowd outside, someone shouted, "It's happening." Inside the Capitol, a phone buzzed with the breaking news alert. Heads snapped toward it. Hands tightened around pens. The decision was about to be read aloud. And in that instant, right before the first words were spoken, Texas held its breath. The voice from the Supreme Court feed was steady, clinical, but every word carried the weight of a political earthquake. In the matter of State of Texas v. United States. The clerk began. Cameras outside the Capitol zoomed in on phone screens held above heads, the audio of the ruling tinny but unmistakable. Protesters leaned in, straining to hear over the restless murmur of the crowd. Then came the verdict. By a narrow 5-4 decision. The Supreme Court had upheld the state of Texas's controversial statute, granting unprecedented autonomy over federal oversight in key electoral procedures. In plain language, Texas could now implement changes that critics warned could dramatically alter voting access in upcoming elections without federal intervention. The reaction was instant, visceral. The explosion from the left side of the barricades, where Democratic activists had gathered all morning, came an audible gasp, followed by a rising tide of angry shouts. Signs waved higher, fists pumped in the air. One woman near the front clutched her phone so tightly it shook in her hand, live streaming her own reaction as tears welled in her eyes. "This is an attack on democracy." Someone shouted into a megaphone, their voice cracking from rage. Reporters scrambled, some breaking into live stand-ups right there on the Capitol lawn. The words, "breaking, Supreme Court sides with Texas," flashed across news tickers nationwide within seconds. On the opposite side of the barricades, cheers erupted. Supporters of the ruling hugged each other, some raising flags high. "States' rights," they chanted, their voices competing with the growing roar of dissent from across the lawn. Cinematic ripples inside the Texas Capitol. The moment hit like a thunderclap. In the gallery above the legislative chamber, Democratic lawmakers exchanged glances heavy with disbelief. One slammed a folder shut with a crack that echoed through the otherwise hushed hall. Down on the floor. A senior Republican smirked faintly before leaning into a whispered conversation with a colleague. Aides began moving quickly, their phones lighting up with calls from Washington. In the press room, a gavel slammed as a spokesperson tried to restore order during a hastily arranged briefing. "One at a time, one at a time," she barked as journalists shouted overlapping questions. What does this mean for 2026? Is there a federal appeal process? Will the Justice Department respond? The digital shockwave within minutes. Twitter was ablaze. The hashtag Texas ruling shot to #1 nationwide, followed closely by hashtag democracy at risk. One viral tweet from a Texas legislator read, "The Supreme Court just greenlit voter suppression. History will not be kind to those who stood by and watched." On TikTok, short clips of protesters' reactions racked up millions of views. One showed a young man throwing his sign to the ground in frustration, shouting into the camera, "This is the start of the end unless we fight back." YouTube live streams outside the Capitol spiked to tens of thousands of viewers, the chat scrolling so fast it became unreadable. We saw this coming. This is bigger than Texas. Watch your own states next. Finally, someone stood up to DC overreach. A nation watching news anchors struggled to keep pace with the developments. Analysts filled the airwaves, some calling the ruling a necessary correction to federal overreach, others warning it was the first domino in a dangerous chain. In one particularly tense live segment, a constitutional scholar shook his head slowly before saying, "This isn't just about Texas. Other states will see this and act. The legal precedent is now there, and it will spread." The split screen showed his grim face on one side, and on the other, live footage of Austin's streets growing louder, denser, and angrier. Inside the eye of the storm, back outside, the temperature seemed to rise with the tension. Police lines shifted, reinforcing areas where protesters pressed closer. The chants from the Democratic side had grown into a steady, almost deafening rhythm. "Shame, shame, shame." Near the barricade, a Democratic state senator addressed a small crowd, her voice shaking but resolute. "We will challenge this in every court, in every legislature, in every community. This is not the end of our fight. It's the beginning." Her words were immediately clipped and posted online, spreading across platforms within minutes. The questions left hanging, but behind the chaos, a deeper unease was spreading. Some legal experts noted unusual language, buried deep in the court's written opinion, wording that hinted at possible broader applications of the decision. If interpreted aggressively, it might open the door for even more sweeping state powers, not just in elections, but in other federally regulated areas. That's when the speculation began. Are we looking at a state-by-state unraveling of federal oversight? One anchor asked on a primetime broadcast, could this be part of a coordinated push? Another commentator wondered aloud. No one had concrete answers. But one thing was certain. The battle was far from over. A cliffhanger for the nation as night began to fall over Austin. The lights of the Capitol shone brightly against the dark clouds that had never fully cleared. The protests didn't stop, if anything. They grew louder in the fading light. Inside newsrooms across the country, editors worked frantically to keep up with the story, knowing that this ruling would dominate headlines for days, maybe weeks. And yet, deep inside the 187-page Supreme Court opinion, there was a detail most people hadn't noticed yet, something that could ignite an even bigger firestorm once it came to light. But that would come later. The ruling was barely an hour old, yet opinion leaders across the country were already shaping the narrative. On cable news, analysts filled the screen in a dizzying carousel of split boxes, each one armed with statistics, precedent, and passion. a divided chorus. "This is historic," declared Mark Ellsworth, a conservative political strategist, his voice calm but brimming with satisfaction. "For too long, federal agencies have been meddling in state affairs. The court has finally affirmed that Texas and any state can govern itself without Big Brother breathing down its neck." In the next frame, Dr. Angela Perez, a constitutional law professor, pushed back hard. "Historic? Yes, but in the same way that dismantling guardrails on a mountain road is historic. This decision opens the door to unchecked power at the state level. We could see a patchwork of conflicting laws that weaken our democracy." Clips like these ping-ponged across platforms, one voice praising, the other warning. On the ground, meanwhile, in Austin, the human impact was visible. Local activists, some of whom had been camped outside the Capitol since dawn, found themselves fighting back tears as cameras closed in. I really thought the court would protect us," said Rachel Hunt, a voting rights organizer, her voice cracking mid-sentence. "This ruling tells millions of people their voices don't matter." Just steps away, Bill Jackson, a rancher from West Texas and supporter of the ruling, grinned at a local reporter. "I'm glad they finally gave power back to the people who actually live here. Washington doesn't know us, doesn't understand our way of life." Sound bites that stuck. The most shared quote of the day came from civil rights attorney Samuel O'Neill, who told MSNBC, "Today, the court didn't just rule on a case, it rewrote the balance of power, and the ink isn't even dry." By contrast, a Republican lawmaker's clip lit up conservative social media. "This is a win for liberty. If you don't like how Texas runs its elections, don't live in Texas." The polarity was stark, and the media was milking every drop of tension. The former judge speaks, but it was the appearance of a familiar and unexpected voice that deepened the mystery. Former Texas Supreme Court Justice Evelyn Rourke, long retired and known for staying out of politics, broke her silence in a rare interview with a Houston radio station. Her tone was measured, but the words landed like a warning. "I've read the majority opinion," Rourke said. "There is language in there that doesn't belong, phrases that hint at future cases already in the pipeline." This wasn't written for Texas alone. It was written for other states watching closely. When pressed to explain, she declined, saying only, "Watch the next term's docket. You'll understand." Her cryptic comments spread online within hours, spawning dozens of YouTube breakdowns and Reddit threads. Some speculated she was alluding to coordinated legal strategies between states. Others wondered if she was hinting at federal agencies preparing countermoves, legal war rooms back in Washington. Think tanks and advocacy groups were scrambling. Lawyers gathered in what one insider described as war rooms, mapping out scenarios for challenges, counters, and legislative end runs. "This fight isn't over, it's just changing arenas," said Harvey Lynn, policy director for a national voting rights coalition. "We'll see lawsuits filed before the week is out." Meanwhile, conservative legal circles were openly celebrating. In a closed-door gathering in Dallas, caught partially on a leaked live stream, one strategist was heard saying, "If we can hold this precedent for even a year, it'll be too embedded to reverse." Emotions on edge. In live interviews outside the Capitol, tempers ran high. A young Democratic city council member stood in front of flashing police lights, her voice trembling with fury. "They just told us the rules don't matter as long as you're in power. Well, Guess what? Power shifts. Not an hour later, a Republican county commissioner in the same spot delivered the counterpunch. The court just recognized that local control matters. People in D.C. are panicking because they can't boss Texas around anymore. Both clips aired back-to-back on the evening news. The contrast sharp enough to make viewers' heads spin. The debate turns darker late into the night as the initial wave of hot takes began to settle. A different tone started to creep into the conversation, one laced with suspicion. On a national broadcast, a panelist leaned forward and asked a question that no one wanted to touch earlier. Was this ruling influenced? The host pressed for clarification. The panelist only said, "Look at the timing. Look at who benefits. And look at the cases lined up next." A loaded silence followed before the show cut to commercial. The stage for speculation by dawn the next morning. Americans woke to headlines that were less about the what and more about the why. Overnight, Evelyn O'Rourke's warning had fused with online conspiracy chatter, creating a fertile ground for the next phase of the story: wild theories, whispered deals, and the possibility that the real battle had only just begun. And as pundits sharpened their talking points for another news cycle, one thing was certain: no one could agree on whether Texas had just been liberated, or whether it had just been set on a collision course with the rest of the nation. By the time the sun rose over Austin the next morning, the facts of the Supreme Court's decision were no longer the only focus. They had become the launchpad for a whirlwind of theories. Some were grounded in political logic, others belonged to a darker, murkier world. The ruling wasn't just a legal decision. To many, it felt like a chess move in a much larger game. And like all games played in smoke-filled backrooms, not every piece was visible on the board. Theory 1. The long game in state politics. This was the theory political insiders gravitated toward first: that the decision was part of a deliberate, years-long Republican strategy to secure state-level control in key battleground regions. Texas, with its massive electoral weight, had always been the crown jewel. If the state could cement its ability to regulate its own elections without federal oversight, other states might follow, creating a block of jurisdictions less vulnerable to federal challenges. Evidence for the theory: the timing. This ruling came just before new redistricting maps were set to be finalized. Legislative breadcrumbs, bills quietly passed in recent sessions that now align perfectly with the expanded powers granted by the court. Statements from think tanks over the last decade advocating exactly this type of shift in state authority. "This isn't just about 2026, said one unnamed campaign strategist to a Dallas paper. It's about the next 10 years of political dominance." Theory 2. The hidden clause buried deep in the majority opinion. Page 143, to be exact, was a section that legal scholars immediately flagged. The language was broad, even vague, suggesting that the same legal principle could be applied to other areas of governance beyond elections. What areas? Theoretically, environmental regulation, education standards, even certain healthcare mandates. "This isn't a one-off," said constitutional scholar Dr. Marla Chen. "It's a blueprint for state sovereignty battles across multiple policy fronts." In this framing, Texas wasn't just fighting for its elections. It was kicking open a legal door that dozens of other states might now walk through. Theory 3. The quiet federal retreat. A smaller but growing group of analysts suggested the decision might actually reflect a subtle shift inside the federal government itself. The theory goes that some federal agencies are overextended, facing budget cuts and political pushback, and might be quietly willing to let certain fights go, especially ones they can't win easily. If you can't enforce something, you might as well let it be taken off your plate, speculated one former DOJ attorney. Supporters of this theory point to the unusually muted reaction from certain federal departments. There were no fiery press releases, no emergency press conferences, just a few carefully worded statements about reviewing the implications. Theory 4. The Shadow Network, the wild card. This was the one dominating social media feeds. A conspiracy theory painting the ruling as the result of coordinated influence from a shadow network of donors, lobbyists, and political operatives working behind the scenes. Videos circulating on YouTube and TikTok claimed that a small group of ultra-wealthy individuals had met at an exclusive retreat in Wyoming months before the ruling. There, according to unverified leaked notes, the group discussed using state-level power grabs as a hedge against shifting national politics. The theory tied in grainy images of politicians at airports, speculative timelines of meetings, and a now viral quote from former Justice Evelyn Rourke's interview. This wasn't written for Texas alone. It was written for other states watching closely. Skeptics dismissed it as fantasy. But for many online, it was exactly the kind of intrigue that felt too cinematic not to be true. Theory 5. The legal Trojan horse. Some believe Texas might have walked into a trap. By taking this case and winning, they've established a precedent, but one that could later be used against them in ways they haven't anticipated. This ruling gives states enormous power, explained policy analyst Jerome Whitman, but power is neutral. Imagine a future where the federal government is aligned with the opposite party, and states like California use the same precedent to push policies that Texas finds intolerable. It's the kind of theory that turns celebration into unease, even among those who cheered the decision. Audience hook moments for the viewer at home. These competing theories create an irresistible puzzle. Which one makes the most sense? Is this a strategic masterstroke, a coordinated national play, or a move so short-sighted it could backfire spectacularly? The comment sections under news videos were flooded. This is just the start. Other states are already calling their lawyers. The Wyoming retreat thing sounds crazy. But remember the Panama Papers. Trojan horse theory is the only one that scares me. The ominous undercurrent, what tied all these theories together, was a single, unsettling fact. No one seemed entirely sure what the real endgame was. The written opinion had layers, some obvious, some cryptic. The speed with which allied states expressed support for Texas suggested coordination. And the cryptic comments from Rourke were still hanging in the air like an unanswered riddle. Late-night pundits leaned into the suspense. "Mark my words," one said on a national broadcast, "this will not be the last time we talk about this case. We may look back and realize this was the first domino in a chain we couldn't stop once it started." In hushed corners of political circles, whispers grew louder. What if this ruling wasn't just a move in the game, but the opening move of a whole new game altogether? Whatever the truth, the stage was set. Texas had its victory. But somewhere, in offices with closed blinds and locked doors, other plans were already in motion. And if those plans ever came to light, the firestorm we'd seen so far might look tame by comparison. The news cycle was already running hot, but then came the spark. It started quietly, almost too quietly to notice. A midnight email sent from an encrypted account to 3 journalists, known for digging where they're not wanted. The subject line read, "You missed the real story." Attached was a single PDF minus 27 pages of dense legal text, heavily watermarked, labeled confidential, do not distribute, but of course. It was already too late for that dot inside the document, buried deep within the official ruling, in a section so dry and technical that most reporters had skimmed past it, was a hidden clause. It stated, in careful, bureaucratic language, that the ruling's
Now, we've
jurisdiction
all heard of
didn't
politicians
end in Texas,
running from
it
tough
set a
votes.
precedent,
That's not uncommon.
a dangerous
But
one,
Texas Democrats
one
just
that
took
could
it
be interpreted
to Olympic
and
levels. They
weaponized
won the
by
gold
other
medal.
states to enforce the same
And now it's coming back to
restrictions,
bite 'em pretty
bypassing federal
bad,
oversight
because
entirely.
they did something.
In
They
short,
just pulled a stunt
this
that is
wasn't
like, I
just
don't know
a
what you would call
Texas
it.
decision.
Guess we could call it like
This was a blueprint
taking it
dot
straight
by
out
dot.
of the
Social
left's
media
doom
was
loop
boiling.
playbook. It is
Twitter
pretty bad.
threads
They
appeared
ditched the
like
state,
wildfire.
hopped on private
This
jets,
wasn't
and thought
incompetence.
they could stall the
This was
GOP's
design,
redistricting hammer.
hidden in plain
Well,
sight. This
Newsflash,
clause
Texas
could
just
change
reminded
the
them
map
what
overnight.
happens when you run.
If this spreads,
So here's the scene.
next
Let
state
me
could be yours.
fill you in on what happened.
Democrats'
Texas
anger,
House Democrats vanished
already
overnight. They just
simmering,
upped and left,
now erupted.
and they skipped town. They left the
Protesters
state like
flooded
it's a
Austin
bad
streets,
blind date.
not just
In an
chanting for
extraordinary
reversal,
move, Texas
but accusing the
Democrats
state's
have
leadership
fled
of
the state. Some of them
coordinated
are on planes
sabotage.
headed to New York.
The air
Some of them
was
will be
thick with
appearing
homemade
right behind
signs,
me in
bullhorns,
Chicago. Now the question
and the
is,
raw sound
why are
of
they doing
voices
this?
that
Well,
refused to be
Republicans in
drowned out.
Texas are trying to push through
Meanwhile,
a new congressional
in
map
Washington,
that would potentially net
strategists
them an
were
additional
holding their
5
own
seats
emergency
in
meetings.
next year's midterm
Not all of
elections.
them
It's something
were
that Donald
Democrats.
Trump, the president, has
Even
been
some
pushing
Republicans,
where they have
sensing
an
the
advantage to
potential
try to get
fallout,
them as many
whispered
seats as
that
they can
this had
going
gone
into
too far.
the
Then,
midterms. Now,
the
Democrats
second
have
twist.
one major move
An
they can make
insider
in
tip to
Texas
a
because they
national
are the
network
minority,
revealed
and
that
is to
just
leave
days
the
before the
states,
ruling,
and many of them
a
have.
closed-door
In fact,
dinner
if
had taken
51
place
of
at an
them in
upscale
the House of
steakhouse
Representatives in Texas
in
leave the state,
downtown
then they
Dallas.
can't meet because the state
The
constitution
guest list?
says that there has to be
A senior
quorum
state
of
judge,
2/3
two major
in order for
political
any
donors
legislative
and
action
lobbyists
to take
linked
place. Now, how
to
long can this
multiple
last? Well,
interstate
in the past,
campaigns,
Democrats
and
have left the
this
state for several
shocked
weeks to try to
everyone.
block
A
legislation from
consultant
taking
with
place.
a
They did
direct
this
line
in
to the
2021.
governor's office.
According to the Texas
waiter,
Tribune, they
speaking
boarded
under
private
condition
jets
of
bound for
anonymity,
Illinois,
claimed the
Massachusetts
group
to
left the
freeze the
table only
legislature and
once
block a
to
vote
take a
that would
phone
hand
call.
Republicans 5
On
more
the patio,
congressional seats.
He said
Well,
he
needless
overheard
to say,
one of them chuckle
Speaker
and
Dustin
say,
Burrows was not a happy
"Once the
camper,
first
and he acted
domino
quickly.
falls,
He didn't waste
the
time. He
rest
didn't
will
flinch. He
take
didn't
care
go, oh
of
no.
themselves."
He authorized
By noon,
civil arrest
the
warrants,
Washington
and
Post,
Governor
Politico,
Abbott flat out told them,
and every
come back
major
or be
outlet
gone.
had
State
descended
police
on
were put
Texas.
on standby to pick them up the
Camera
moment
crews
they
clogged the
touched
Capitol
Texas
steps.
soil.
The
Like,
governor's
this is a
press
move straight
secretary
from
looked
their own
visibly
playbook. They've
shaken
done
in
this
her
before
afternoon
in
briefing,
D.C. to delay
dodging
votes.
questions with the
But
same line.
here's the thing. Here's
We
the
have
kicker.
no
When you
comment
run from a
on
fight in Texas,
unverified rumors.
you don't get brownie points.
But by
you don't
then,
get a gold star.
it was already
You don't have
too
applause
late.
and everyone's saying, oh,
The
good job, we are
narrative
so
was out
proud of
there.
you. No, that's
And
not
it
how you
was.
keep your base happy.
Growing legs.
You
The
get
race against
this
time
headlines
begins.
from the
On
Houston
one
Chronicle
side,
that says Texas
the ruling
GOP vows to
supporters
haul back runaway
racing to frame
lawmakers.
this as a
And
victory
now the clock
for
starts
state
ticking
sovereignty,
on your political career
insisting
and
the
maybe even
clause
jail
was
time.
standard legal
And then Ken
language
Paxton
and
steps into the
nothing
ring.
more.
The Texas
On the
Tribune
other,
reports he's
outraged
investigating Beto
lawmakers
O'Rourke's powered by people
and
and
activists
the Soros-backed
pushing to have
Texas
the
Majority
clause
PAC
struck
for
down
allegedly
before other
bankrolling these
states
jet-setting
adopted it.
Democrats with flights,
Legal
hotels,
teams
and
were
maybe more.
already drafting injunctions,
That's a bad look.
hoping to
Paxton's
slam
not
the
mincing
brakes
words.
before
He's
the
calling it
idea could
potentially
spread like
bribery,
wildfire
campaign
across
finance
state
violations,
lines.
and abuse of office.
Cable
He's even
news
served
ran
formal
split.
requests to
Screams,
examine, to dig
fiery
into communications
protests
and
in
receipts.
Texas on one
You know,
side,
the kind of paper
calm
trail
but
that can
calculating
ruin
interviews
a
with
political
political
career
operatives on the
and
other.
maybe even put you in
In
jail,
the
as I've
middle,
said.
anchors
You know.
leaned in,
Now, of course, Beto
lowering
fired
their
back,
voices
painting Paxton
as
as
if
the, he's the
discussing
impeached
state
guy going
secrets.
after democracy.
the twist within the twist.
Yawn, nice try.
Late that night,
Because as
a
Politico
whistleblower
points out,
from within
yeah,
the Attorney
Politico,
General's office
this isn't about
hinted there
optics.
might
It's
be
about
more to
shutting
the
down a
document,
stunt that left
and
Texans without
that the leak
representation.
wasn't
You
an
can't do
accident.
that. You can't just up and
According
leave.
to them,
Texas,
someone inside
well,
the system
Paxton
wanted
specifically,
this clause
is making it personal.
exposed. But
If you get
why?
flown in on donor
power?
dollars to skip work,
For
you
chaos? cross
better be
or
ready
to
for a
bait the other
courtroom
side
cameo.
into making
And he
a
knows,
fatal
just like
misstep.
Abbott knows, that the
No
public
one
isn't
could say
siding with
for sure.
lawmakers hiding in hotel
But
bars.
one thing was certain.
Now, if you thought that was bold, wait
this
for the
was
next
no
one.
longer a
Senator
state-level
John Cornyn, I
dispute.
know some people do
This
not
was
like
a
him.
national crisis
but he did call
unfolding
the
in
FBI.
real time. And
yeah.
as the cameras
The Houston
rolled,
Chronicle
the
confirmed
protesters chanted,
that he
and
asked
politicians
federal agents to
scrambled.
help track
A
down the
question
Democrats
hung
hiding
heavy
in
the
Illinois,
air.
despite Illinois
Was
Governor
this the
J.B.
moment
Pritzker
Texas
saying they'd
had
be
changed
welcome
the
guests.
rules for
Not a
everyone?
good look. The
Or was
FBI,
this
according
just
to
the
Politico, agreed
opening
to
move in a
assist,
much
although
larger
legal
game?
experts across the spectrum have
Because
said this
somewhere,
is shaky
in a quiet
because
office
abandoning
lit
a
only
quorum
by the glow of a
isn't technically
computer
a federal
screen,
crime.
a figure
But Cornyn's
scrolled through
framing
social
of this
media,
is genius.
watching the chaos
Think about it.
unfold.
Upholding constitutional
and
duties
smiled, Dot, as
is
the dust
way
begins
better,
to settle,
and
if
like
only
it just
for a
sounds good
moment.
and it's right.
Texas
And you're
finds
not just
itself
wrangling
not merely
lawmakers.
at
That's
the
not what you're doing.
epicenter of a
The optics
political
are
earthquake,
really bad.
but
They're
perhaps
brutal
the
for
fault
Democrats.
line for the
Federal
next
agents
decade of
potentially
American
knocking on hotel
governance.
doors while
What
Abbott
happened
sharpens
here
his legal
will
strategy
not
back
stay.
home.
Here, political
The Texas Tribune
analysts
says
are
Abbott's
already
office is
warning
already
that this
preparing for
ruling
court
is
fights
more
to
than a
declare seats
Texas
vacant.
problem.
And that's the part
It's
these
a
guys did
precedent,
not
and
think through.
precedents have a way of spreading like wildfire.
By turning this into a
especially
federal
in the
state standoff,
tinderbox
they've
that
made
is
themselves
modern American
the-
politics.
what would you
the
say,
ripple
the
effect
pariah,
could be
the-
massive. Other
That's
state
maybe not the right
legislatures
word
are
choice.
quietly
I guess you could
observing,
say the
some
face of
even
political
drafting
cowardice
their
in every
own
conservative
versions
media
of the
cycle.
ruling,
Like,
waiting
you're
to
going to be the
see if
poster
Texas
boy
survives the inevitable
for
legal
weeks
onslaught.
by doing
In
this.
backroom
Of like
conversations,
bad choices of what
governors
not to
from
do.
both
Now you're
parties
going to
are
be in the
asking
news cycle for a
themselves,
while. Good
if
job,
Texas
Texas
can
Democrats.
do this,
Meanwhile,
why
Abbott is
can't
playing a
we?
long game that only a
Election
seasoned Texas
strategists,
brawler would try.
the kind who live
Houston
on
Chronicle
caffeine
reports
and
he's
adrenaline,
petitioned the
are
all-Republican
recalculating
Texas Supreme
their
Court to kick
2026
Democratic
and
caucus chair Gene
2028
Wu out of
maps
office
overnight.
entirely for abandoning
This
his
isn't
post.
just about
That's
this cycle.
9
One DC
Texas
insider
Supreme
tells
Court
a national
justices.
network
9.
if similar
0
rulings
Democrats
take hold,
deciding Wu's fate.
entire
Paxton
voting
supports it,
blocks
saying
could
that
shift
failure to return by
permanently.
Friday is ground for
we could be
automatic forfeiture
talking
of
about
office.
the balance of power in
Ooh,
Congress
that's a big
for
one.
a
This
generation.
isn't just punishment, it's
Some
precedent.
believe
It
this
tells
could benefit
every
one
lawmaker
party
in
more
Texas,
than the
you
other.
walk out on your job
Others
and you
see
don't
a
just
more
get fired. You don't
dangerous
just get a slap on the
possibility,
wrist.
a
You get
slow
replaced.
erosion
And Abbott
of
knows
public
the
faith
court's
in
on his
fair
side.
elections.
And this is what the left calls
The idea
authoritarian.
that the rules
Oh, how
can
dare
be
you?
rewritten
Well,
mid-game
this is what
doesn't sit
Texas
well with
calls
voters.
doing the job, which, by the
No
way, you
matter
signed
their
up for.
political
And you
leaning,
don't get to
the
run a
ruling
Chicago
also puts the
steakhouse
US
on your
Supreme
donor's
Court
dime
in a
and
precarious
still cash
position.
a Texas paycheck.
Legal scholars are already
Not here.
predicting that some aspect
And if Wu
of
loses his
the
seat,
case will make its way to
watch
Washington.
how quickly
if the
the
court
others
upholds
fold.
Texas's
Catch a
decision,
flight back home because they're going, oh,
critics
shoot,
will
I don't want to have
accuse it
that
of
happen to me.
partisanship.
Oh, yeah.
If
It's
it
going to happen. If
strikes
he
it
goes,
down,
they're
it
going to get
risks
back home real
inflaming
quick.
an already furious
But here's
Texas
the bigger picture.
political
This fight
establishment.
isn't just about
Either
Texas
way,
redistricting.
The court's reputation,
Axios points out it's
already
part of a
battered by
nationwide
years of
Republican offensive to
controversial
redraw
decisions,
maps and erase
faces
blue state
another body
hypocrisy.
blow.
You see, for
One
years, and I mean for
constitutional
years,
law professor
Democrats gerrymandered states like
puts it
Illinois,
starkly.
Maryland,
The
and
Supreme
California into a
Court is
one-party
walking
fortress
into a
that
no-win
there's no
scenario.
way a GOP can
They're not
ever
just deciding a case.
grow a base there.
They're
It just doesn't happen.
deciding whether the
And
public
now
still
Republicans are
believes
using the same
system
rules, and
is
the left is
fair.
like, oh, this is a threat to
Beyond the
democracy.
legal
No,
and
it's
political
fair.
ramifications
Where?
lies a quieter, more personal
Newsflash.
story. One
You started
playing
it.
out in homes, diners,
Like,
and
Abbott
community
and
centers
Paxton
across
aren't just
Texas and
reacting.
beyond. In small
They're flipping the
towns,
game board.
families are split
Now,
down
the Texas
middle.
showdown is energizing
Thanksgiving
conservatives
dinners will
across the U.S.,
be
especially with
quieter,
midterms looming.
but not because
And
there's
Alberta,
nothing
way up
to
in Alberta,
say.
the conservatives
Rather
there are watching
because
too.
some topics
Because
have
it's the same
become
principle.
too explosive
Stand your ground,
to even mention.
fight
In
on
urban
your terms,
centers.
and don't let the
Activists are
other side
organizing
weaponize
not just
process against you.
protests, but
And as the
voter
Texas
education
Tribune
drives,
reminds us,
legal aid
Republicans have the
clinics,
courts,
and
the
grassroots
legislature, and public opinion on the
campaigns.
side. The Democrats
message
who
is
ran
clear.
thought they'd buy
Don't
time,
just
and instead
react.
they bought front
Prepare.
row seats to the moment
And for
their own
political
tactics
leaders,
turned against
the
them.
ruling is
You
a
see, for
double-edged
years they
sword.
claimed the moral high
Those
ground
who
on
back it
redistricting,
may find
but now
themselves
even friendly
celebrated
media
as
can prop up the
defenders of
talking
their
points.
base,
Just
or
watch the
vilified
CNN
as
panel. Just
architects
watch
of a
them
Dangerous
try to
present.
defend the Texas Democrats
Those
fleeing
who
the state.
oppose it
only for
risk
Scott
being
Jennings to
labeled
absolutely
obstructionists,
shut them
even
down.
if they see
The
themselves
reality
as
is they got
guardians of
elected.
democracy.
They got elected.
That
They got
cable
elected
news
to go
countdown
to work in the
clocks
Texas
tick
state
toward
capitol.
key court
They've left the
dates.
state. They're
Social media remains
abandoning
a
their
battlefield
constituents, and if they
of
want to go vote
competing
against the map,
narratives.
that's fine.
You can
but running
feel
off
the
to Illinois, the most
tension,
gerrymandered state in
the
the country,
sense that
I mean,
the country is in
I
the
understand
opening act
no
of
one
a
in the PR
political
department at the
drama
Texas House
whose ending
Democratic
no one
Conference
can
must have been at
predict.
work that day, but it looks
Political
horrific for them.
commentators
To
are
run
warning
off to
viewers that this is not
Now,
a
you'd
one-off.
think this fight would stay in
If
Texas, but it's
wins
already
here,
spilling
one
across state
says on
lines.
a
It's
primetime
spreading.
panel,
What started as a
we're
Lone
entering
Star
uncharted
showdown
waters.
has become a
And
full-on
history
national
tells us that
redistricting
when
arms race.
America
It is
enters
happening.
uncharted
This
waters,
isn't the sleepy
the voyage
once-a-decade
is
process
never
most people
smooth.
ignore and go like, oh, wait, this
the sense
happened?
of
Oh,
history
okay,
in the
whatever.
making is
This is an
almost
all-out
tangible.
sprint before
You can
the
hear it in
2026
the
midterms.
debates on the Senate
Republicans in
floor.
other red states are taking
You can
notes.
see it in the
California,
anxious
New York,
faces
Illinois,
of
they're all
voters
babbling.
leaving town
Well,
hall meetings.
I guess you could say even rumbling
And you
about
can
counter
feel
moves.
it in the
But
uneasy
here's the
quiet
problem.
that
Many of those
falls
states
over
are
conversations
trapped by
about
their
the
own
future.
independent
Because
redistricting
deep
commissions.
down, everyone
they
knows
set that doozy up.
Texas might
Democrats
just
sold
be the
this
beginning.
fairness tool,
The
this
fight
gem
ahead
of an
isn't
idea
just
when they
about a
thought
law
they'd hold power
or a
forever.
ruling
And now those
or
same
even
guardrails
about
are shackling
Texas.
them in place. But
It's about
Texas
the
and Florida
rules of the
redraw at
game
will.
itself.
It's the political equivalent
And
of
when the
like
rules
bringing
change,
a tiny little
everything changes.
like water gun
The question
to a
is,
50 caliber
who will
gunfight.
adapt
And everybody's got
fastest?
50 calibers except
and
you.
who will be
It's like,
left behind?
This is not good.
Night
Texas
has
didn't just
fallen
light a spark,
over
they
Austin.
handed conservatives everywhere
the air
a
is
playbook.
thick,
And the
not
message
just
is
with the late
beautifully
summer
simple.
humidity,
Control the
but
maps,
with the low,
control the game.
steady hum
And
of
once you've
voices.
got the game board in your hands,
Chants
you set the
that have
rules.
been
This
echoing
isn't
for
just about
hours,
like
now
who wins the
mingled
next
with
election.
the distant thump of drum
It's about
beats and
cementing
the
the rules
flicker
of the
of
road for the next
candlelight.
decade. The impacts
Congress
of this are gonna be
Avenue is a
long
river of
felt.
movement. Protesters
Washington Post
holding up
reported that
signs
Democrats are
read,
now
"Our
eyeing
vote,
aggressive
our
redistricting
voice,
tool, and they're
and
like, it's
democracy
all bark.
is
It's all
not for
bark.
sale.
Like,
The Texas state
it doesn't
capitol
mean
looms
anything.
in the background,
Okay?
bathed in
like
golden
they're still
light.
constrained. They're
Its
still bound
dome
up by
is
the rules
framed
that they
by
set
a
up themselves.
cloudless indigo
And Texas
sky,
is using every
but the
advantage.
scene
The
beneath
law,
it
the
is
courts,
anything
and momentum.
but
And the
calm.
result is a map that
On
doesn't
one
just help
side
in
of the
2026.
barricades, police
It helps
and
shape
riot
every
gear
election
stand
until
shoulder to
2030,
shoulder.
and that's why Abbott
On
and
the
Paxton
other,
are fighting like it's
citizens,
life or death,
young and
tooth and
old,
nail.
students
Because
and
in politics,
veterans,
once you set the
teachers and
structure,
truck
you don't
drivers
just win
push
races.
forward, not
you
with
win
violence,
eras.
but with unyielding
Remember what I said when this would be
defiance.
long
A lone
felt. The
news
impacts of
camera
this.
captures
Now,
a
of
moment
course, the left
that
is
will
vying
later
revenge.
be
Like, I'll
replayed
get you.
nationwide. A teenage.
Okay. Well, the
girl,
Guardian warns
no
of an
more than
undemocratic
16,
spiral.
holding
Governors
a
in blue
weathered
states are already talking
pocket-sized
about
US
offsetting Texas's
Constitution
moves
in
by
her
redrawing
hands.
their own maps.
She raises it above
Okay,
her head.
here's the fatal
the
flaw.
pages fluttering
Just
in
gonna
the
point
warm
this out.
breeze,
They've
and
already
shouts,
gerrymandered themselves to the
"This
max.
belongs to
You can't
us,
eliminate
all
Republican
of
seats
us."
that don't exist.
It is not a
But it's not
politician's
there.
speech
States like
or a lawyer's
Massachusetts,
argument,
Rhode Island,
but a raw cry
Hawaii
that slices
have already
through the
squeezed every
noise.
possible drop of
Even
advantage.
some of
There's
the
nothing left to take.
officers
So their
shift
threat sounds
uncomfortably,
tough, sure,
their
but
eyes
it's
darting
empty. It doesn't mean
toward the
anything.
ground
And the
dot
more
in
they
a
bluff, the more
nearby
obvious it
hotel
becomes.
suite.
They're out of
Party
place.
strategists
They have
huddle
nothing.
around
All the while,
glowing
Texas is
laptop
just getting
screens,
started.
refreshing
They're pairing
news
maps
feeds
with legal
every few
precedents
seconds.
that will
The
make it
decision
even
in Texas
harder
has
for
already
future
sparked
Democratic
emergency
legislatures to
meetings.
undo the changes.
In 3 other states,
This is how you
each
flip the
now
narrative.
weighing
Instead
whether
of
to
defending
attempt
against blue
similar
state
moves.
overreach, Republicans
Legal
are forcing
teams on
Democrats to
both
go, oh
sides
shoot, I
are
gotta
preparing
figure out
for
what I'm
the
gonna
inevitable
do.
appeals. Some
They
in
got they're
Texas,
scrambling now.
Others headed
They're having to
straight
learn
for the
to,
Supreme
like,
Court. The
learn-
nation
get a new
watches as
playbook
Texas
because
becomes a battleground.
right now
not
they
just
can't
for
win.
policy,
And this
but
is
for
how momentum
principle.
shifts. That's
Every
how you turn the tide
conversation
and keep it.
In
What's
coffee
unfolding in
shops,
Texas right
on
now isn't
factory
just a
floors,
state-level
in
drama.
crowded
It's a case
subway
study in what
cars,
happens when
seems to
conservatives
circle
stop playing
back to the
defense and
same
start
question.
rewriting the rules of engagement.
If this can
for
happen here,
decades,
where
the
does it
Republicans
stop?
have let
And
Democrats
as the
set
camera
the terms
pans
of debate,
upward from the
buying into
candlelit
moral
protests
framing
to
of
the shining
fairness,
Capitol
voter
dome,
protection,
a
while blue
single
states like Illinois,
question
Maryland, and
lingers,
California
aimed
carved up
directly
congressional
at the
seats,
viewer.
and no one was
Do
like,
you
"Oh no,
think
that's
this
not
was
fair."
justice served
And they did
or
it with
democracy
surgical
undermined?
precision.